remember reading once, Henry David Thoreau had made that famous statement, most people lead lives of quiet desperation. Now, what does he mean by that? He means that, in effect, most people are so caught up in daily affairs, mundane things. It's not that they're trivial, but it's just nothing bigger. So they get caught up, in those days, they got caught up with, I guess, cranberry farming and milking cows and looking for clams on the beach in Massachusetts and things like that. Not that it's bad, but that became the big thing of life, day after week, after month, after year. Okay. So, in other words, there was never a sense of something bigger is coming, something greater, something beyond what I could have imagined. I know people, I don't know if you do, I know people that have never traveled more than 50 miles from where they were born. I'm not saying it's bad, I'm just saying, boy, there is a really big planet out there. Okay? Lots of things to learn and experience. Lives of quiet desperation, you see. And our readings today pull people out of those situations. Isaiah the prophet. Isaiah apparently, at least, was friendly with the royal family in Jerusalem. He was certainly able to pop in and out of the palace and talk to the king fairly often. But what was his life about? Maybe a 10-mile radius of Jerusalem and not much more. And he realizes that he's got problems. He's got sin in his life too. We know at least that he was married because he had 2 sons. It's about all we know about him. But he, in that vision in the temple, says, I am a man of unclean lips, in a people of unclean lips. I say things that I'm embarrassed about, that I shouldn't have said. And so do other people around me. I'm not the one, not me. But he has that great theophany of the angels crying out, holy, 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 just like we say in Mass. And they purify him by touching his mouth with that coal or ember from the temple altar where they would burn incense. You're clean now. Fire was a symbol of cleanliness. We say a prayer like that, don't we, when we hear the gospel? May the Lord be on my mind, on my lips, and in my heart. It's playing back to Isaiah the prophet. We're remembering this. And then the Sanctus, the Holy Holy, during Mass. It's all out of that reading from the Old Testament. But Isaiah then becomes this great person who moves outside of himself, outside of any possibility he thought would be there for the rest of his life, and he's moved into something much greater. And he becomes one of the great prophets, perhaps the greatest, but certainly among the great prophets. And he's known today, thousands of years later. Who would have thought? He surely didn't. But he was inspired to say, send me. Think about Peter today. Peter knew a lot about fishing. Jesus didn't. He knew that. Jesus was from up in the hills. Peter was growing up along the lake there. He had a fishing business. He knew how to do this. And you don't go out during the day out into the deep to catch. That's not how it works. Different hours of the day are better for fishing, and there are different spots in the Sea of Galilee that are notoriously good and notoriously bad for fishing. And you don't go out in the deep water and throw the nets out. You might get 3 or 4. Big deal. And what's it like for you and me, sisters and brothers, to work all night and catch nothing? It's not just about Peter and fishing. Sometimes I feel it as a priest. I feel like there's so many more people out there, and you're doing everything you can rack your brain around to attract people and encourage people to come and get their spiritual life together, get filled up, and you get this, It feels like nighttime a lot, doesn't it? And for many of you, I know many of you, have witnessed to faith in your family. No response. You know, I don't go to church. You never make yourself part of the body, really? You're always out in your little separate bubble somewhere. But you encourage. And what about as a parent? Aren't there times when you think, my gosh, I don't know what else to say to the kid. I'm just, well, God help me. You might think that, right? I fished all night and I caught nothing. Or maybe as a student you have this trouble too. I studied like crazy and I didn't do so well on the test. All these things happen. Peter knew what it was like to be discouraged. But at the Lord's word, he goes out and does something that he knows is not practical and doesn't make any sense. And he goes out into deep water, and then look what happens at the word of Christ. It's then that Peter realizes that Jesus is way beyond a great rabbi, teacher. And he calls him Lord. Ooh, that was reserved for God. He's almost terrified. A man who knew exactly how to do his job was so wowed by what happened that he realized what was present with him was the divine. Something much greater. St. Paul, same experience. He worked so hard at destroying the church, and then he was converted, and he became the builder of the church. He had to make a change. He had to go out into the deep water at the word of Christ. Sisters and brothers, on this Sunday, we are told the same thing, you and me. Even though we feel like we're at the nighttime, in many ways, of Christianity, we see it passed up in many ways, we see it marginalized in many ways, in some parts of the world actively attacked. We see that we're in the night, but we're told, aren't we? Now it's morning. Go out into the deep water and cast your net. Do it again at the word of Christ. And at the word of Christ we trust that what God brings us is a beautiful abundance. That as we develop into an even larger community and a greater community, that we develop warmer relationships with more people, that we become something greater than we were because we trust in the word of Christ. Christ didn't say, by the way, don't change and stay exactly the same because you like the way these things are. That was not the word of Christ. You go find that in the gospel. Tell me where you found it. Instead, it's go out in the deep water and cast your net. If you do that, you will never lead a life of quiet desperation. Ready? Amen.